Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning to everyone. Welcome to Economic News Today. I am Wan Anisa and today's top story will be Malaysia economic performance in the first quarter of 2025. According to a Reuters report published on 16 May 2025, Malaysia economy expanded by 4.4% during the first quarter of the year. Although the economy continued to grow, the growth rate was slightly lower than the 4.9% recorded in the fourth quarter of 2024. The slowdown has raised concern among economists and policymakers, particularly due to global trade tensions, weaker oil and gas production, and uncertainty in international markets. However, strong household spending, investment activities, export, and tourism continue to support economic growth. This issue is closely related to macroeconomics because it involves important concepts such as economic growth, aggregate demand and aggregate supply, as well as GDP and national income. So now, let's begin with our first reporter for a closer look at Malaysia economic growth performance.
Thank you, Ms. Anis. So next, I will discuss about the economic growth overview. So firstly, economic growth refers to an increase in the production of goods and services in a country over time. It is usually measured using the GDP or it calls gross domestic product. According to the Reuters article, Malaysia economies grew by 4.4% in the first quarter of 2025. Although this was lower than the 4.9% recorded in the previous quarter, the economy continued to grow. Next, several factors contributed to this growth. First, household spending remains strong. Consumers continue spending on goods and services due to stable employment and income growth. Second, investment activity supported economy growth. Businesses continue investing in sectors such as manufacturing, constructions, and technology, which help create jobs and increase the productivity. Third, export also contributed positively. Strong demand for electrical and electronic products helped increase productions and the income. However, there were also factors that slowed the growth. One factor was lower oil gas productions, which reduced the contribution of the mining sector of the GDP. Another factor was global trade uncertainty. Trade tension caused businesses to become more cautious about investment and international trade activities. Overall, Malaysia's economy remained resilient despite this challenge because domestic demands, investment, and export continue supporting economic growth.
Moving on to our second concept, we will now look at the aggregate demand and aggregate supplies, or ADAS. So this concept helps explain how Malaysia was able to maintain economic growth despite facing several external challenges. By analyzing both demand and supply in the economy, we can better understand the factors that influence Malaysia's GDP performance in the first quarter of 2025. So let's begin with the aggregate demand. So according to our economic report, aggregate demand refers to the total demand for the goods and services within an economy. Economists calculate aggregate demand using the formula AD equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus N. In Malaysia, the main drivers of demand were household spending, investment activities, exports, and tourism. So these sectors continue to perform well during the first quarter of 2025, helping businesses generate revenue and supporting overall economic growth. This strong demand play an important role in keeping Malaysia's economic expanding despite global uncertainties. Looking at the factors behind this strong demand, we can see three key contributors. First, household consumptions remain strong as stable employment and income encourage consumers to spend more on goods and services. So the second one, investment activities expanded, particularly in manufacturing, constructions, and infrastructure projects. This investment boosted productivity and created new job opportunities. So third, export growth continued to strengthen due to high international demand for Malaysia's electrical and electronic products. So as a result, aggregate demand increased from 81 to 82, leading to the higher real GDP from year 1 to year 2. This indicates a growing economy with a greater economic activity. While demand remains strong, we must also examine the supply sides of the economy. Aggregate supplies refers to the total amount of goods and services that producers are willing and able to supply at different price levels. Several factors influence aggregate supplies, including production costs, labor productivity, technology, resources availability, and business confidence. However, during the first quarter 2025, Malaysia experienced weaker oil and gas production, which affected the country's overall productive capacity and placed pressures on economic growth. Turning to the challenges on the supply side, two major issues were identified. The first was the low oil and gas production, the reduced national output and weaker aggregate supplies. The second challenge was global trade uncertainty. Ongoing trade tension created uncertainty in international markets, causing business to be more cautious while making productions and investment decisions. The combined effect causes aggregate supply to shift from AS1 to AS2. As a result, the GDP growth slowed while price levels increased, creating inflationary pressures within the economy. Looking at the overall picture, the interaction between the aggregate demand and aggregate supply produced both positive and negative economic effects. On the positive side, strong domestic demand supported continued economic growth, created more employment opportunities and increased export income. However, the economy also faces challenges, including slower GDP growth, lower oil productions, inflationary pressure, and ongoing uncertainties. So overall, strong aggregate demand helped offset some of the weaknesses on the supply side, allowing Malaysia's economy to remain resilient during the quarter. Turning how to national income, this concept refers to the total income earned from the producing goods and services within the economy. Economic data shows a close relationship between the GDP and the national income. As the GDP increases, businesses produce more goods and services, which leads to the higher wages, profits, and employment opportunities. Malaysia grows in exports and tourism also contributed to the higher income levels across the economy. Another important concept is the multiplier effect. When the people earn more income, they tend to spend more. This additional spending generates more income for businesses and workers, creating a cycle that further stimulates economic growth. Therefore, the growth achieved in the first quarter 2025 not only increased productions but also improved the national income and the economic activity throughout the country.
Thank you, Mr. Fadil. Now, let's look at GDP and national income. GDP or gross domestic product is the total value of goods and services produced in a country. It is one of the main indicators used to measure economic performance. Malaysia GDP grew by 4% in the first quarter of 2025, although this was lower than 4.9% in the previous quarter. It still shows that the country continued to grow. Next, GDP can be measured using the expenditure approach. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus net export. The four components are consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. In Malaysia, growth was mainly supported by strong household spending, investment activity, export, and tourism. Private consumption grew by 5.0%, reflecting continued household spending. Government expenditure increased by 4.3%, supporting economic activity through public sector spending. Investment recorded the strong growth at 9.7%, showing business confidence and expansion. Meanwhile, export grew by 4.1%, supported by trade and tourism activities. GDP is closely related to national income. When GDP increases, businesses earn more profit, workers receive more wages, and the government collects more tax revenue. Overall, Malaysia's positive GDP growth showed that the country continued generating income and economic activity despite global challenge. Now, let's move to our economic analysis for the evaluation and recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Zana, for the explanation about the analysis.
Overall, Malaysia economy remained resilient in the first quarter of 2025 despite the several challenges. One of the trends of the economy was strong domestic demand. Household spending remained high while investment, export and tourism continue supporting economic growth. However, there are still some challenges. First, Malaysia depends heavily on the oil and gas sector. Lower production in the sector can affect economic growth. Second, global trade uncertainty may reduce export and also affect business confidence. Although GDP growth remained positive, it slowed from 4.9% to 4.4%, showing that economic momentum has weakened slightly. Now, let's move to the first recommendation for the government. To improve the economic performance, the government should encourage investment, revise the economy, and also expand the export market. Businesses should invest in the technology and explore new market to remain competitive with others. Consumers should practice good financial planning and also continue supporting local business. In conclusion, Malaysia economy remains strong, but continued efforts are needed to ensure sustainability growth in the future. Secondly, we go with the important recommendation for business, which is recommendation for consumer. First, businesses should invest in the technology, automation, and digital system. This can help them work faster and also more efficiently. Businesses are also encouraged to improve productivity and expand into their new market by offering different product and service. Exports, exports say companies should reduce risk caused by global trade uncertainty and prepare for the challenges in the world economy. In addition, businesses should provide training programs to help employees to learn new skills and also improve their performance. This action can increase competitiveness, improve profit, and also support long-term economic growth. Lastly, we go with the firm and industry player. People are encouraged to practice responsible financial planning and develop the healthy saving habit. Having the emergency saving can help the family deal with unexpected economic problems. Expect also advise consumers to spend wisely by focusing on essential and also productive goods and service. They recommended avoiding excessive debt and unnecessary spending. Expert also advise consumers to spend wisely by focusing on essential and also productive goods and service. They recommend avoiding excessive debt and also unnecessary spending. In addition, supporting local business and buying locally produced product can help strengthen the economic growth. Experts say this action can increase domestic demand, support GDP growth, and improve economic stability. That is the latest update. Thank you for the watching.
Thank you, Ms. Isa, for the recommendation. Now, we will go to the conclusion. To conclude, Malaysia economic growth continued to grow by 4.4% in the first quarter of 2025, although this was slightly lower than the 4.9% growth recorded in the previous quarter. The growth was mainly supported by strong household spending, investment activities, export, and the recovery of the tourism sector. However, challenges such as lower oil and gas production in the global trade uncertainty slow the pace of economic growth. Our analysis also showed that both aggregate demand and aggregate supply play an important role in determining Malaysia's economic performance. Moving forward, the government, businesses, and consumers must work together by encouraging investment, supporting local industry, and strengthening domestic demand. With effective policies and economic diversification, Malaysia can achieve sustainable economic growth, improve national income, and enhance the standard of living of its people. So, that brings us to the end of our economic news broadcast. We hope this presentation has helped you better understand Malaysia economic growth, aggregate demand, and aggregate supply, as well as GDP and national income. So, thank you for your attention. I am Anis Anissa, and on behalf of our team, thank you for watching. Have a great day.